NFL show, and welcome to our week 4 talking points brought to you by Buskers on the Ball in Dublin's Temple Bar. You can check out Buskers on the Ball on Sunday evenings with a selection of live NFL games, or Red Zone if you prefer, all night long. Now, with the week 4 games now decided, we're at that point of the season where it's generally a lot easier to figure out who's hot and who's not, where we can separate the flashes in the pan from the genuine trends. So with those games now in the books, we're going to kick off tonight, Colin, by discussing quarterbacks who started the season in good fashion. So by now we've got still admittedly a small sample of games for some of them, particularly the rookies. But from what we've seen in particular from CJ Stroud, and where better place to start than with him, this is a guy who can ball. He wasn't necessarily the guy from the rookie class who was expected to be top of the pile and to be the best QB. We'll talk about Bryce Young a little bit later, but Stroud has very much looked the part. He is breaking records. It's rare that you see a quarterback settle into the NFL so quickly.
Yeah, he's been fantastic. I suppose coming into it, Connor, he was considered to be the purest pocket passer, but there were questions about, taking that next step up into the NFL. How will his skills translate? And obviously the stuff around Ohio State QBs in the league. But he's been magnificent. To me, he is the brain from Pinky and the Brain, because he seems to have an answer to everything. Every defense that has tried to cause him trouble, he gets the ball out so quickly, and his ability to read the field, read what opponents are going to do. I mean, you think about, some of the touchdown passes, particularly in the red zone, and how impactful he has been. And he's been laser sharp, both in his processing and his passes. The Texans, I've been very surprised. I absolutely thought they were making the wrong decision in going 2 and 3, but my goodness, Nico Collins has been great, and their offensive coordinator who came across with D'Amico Ryans from the 49ers has done a really, really nice job. He does look like a veteran out there, because usually it takes rookies time. The biggest thing is the speed of the game. In college, it sometimes I think people think it's how open the receivers are. I think that's part of it, but I think a bigger part is just how quick defenses get you and how those windows close so quickly. But Stroud has been able to process all of that. I think he's been immensely impressive. And I listened to an awful lot of podcasts during the week, and everybody has been impressed. From Dan Orlovsky talking about him, to Chris Sims, to the guys at the Ringer, at the Athletic. They're all raving about this guy, and rightly so. And yes, okay, it is 4 games, and we need to see him do it for a season. But usually at this point, certainly for many of the QBs, it is the growing pains. We probably need to see him go through a rocky patch before we can say he's definitely it. But he is, for me, the most impressive rookie that we have seen.
And as you say, Colin, it's not just 1 or 2 things either, is it? It's not like he's, we've seen some quarterbacks flash where they're really good with their legs, and it's covering over for the fact that maybe the arm talent hasn't developed in the way that we thought it would, or they come up against one of the great NFL defenses and just get torn apart. I mean, that Steelers unit isn't exactly a defense that you expect him to be able to pick apart with these, but he's doing it in so many different ways. He's able to process, as you say, so quickly. He's not forcing the ball in there. It's not like he has necessarily, all pro receiving talent either. I mean, Nico Collins has shown up really strongly, as you said. Tank Dell has flashed at times and shown, particularly last week, although not so much against the Steelers, that he's one to watch. But it's even the lovely touch throws, like he hits people in stride. It's not just slinging the ball around the place. Like, he seems to have the right club in the bag for every shot that he needs to make.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that I think they've done a really good job of prepping him as well. There's so much that goes into it, and they are utilizing his strengths and also the strengths of that offense. And they deserve immense credit. I mean, this is a new coaching staff. This is a team that has been the laughing stock of the league for a number of years now. Certainly for the last three. For all sorts of different reasons. But even when Bill O'Brien was there, there was still issues around that team, even when they go back to when they were famously ahead against the Chiefs. D'Amico has absolutely changed the culture there. And, it's obviously it's very exciting. I mean, this is what you want. The other part of this, Connor, of course, is the rookie deal. I mean, that's the big piece. If they have found their guy and they are ready to go, they have another 4 years of that are cost control. So yeah, it's a massive advantage.
We'll try and avoid the elephants in the room for our collective franchises as we talk about previously hapless teams who usually seem to make every wrong decisions and have somehow managed to make the right decisions. But probably another team in that basket is the Colts. I mean, when we were talking in preseason, we were nearly saying prayers for both CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson, saying these look like two really talented guys. These are not necessarily two great landing spots where you would necessarily expect to see people thrive in terms of organizational culture, in terms of weapons or lack thereof available to them, in terms of the history of the two franchises. But Richardson with the Colts has also looked really good at times. Probably not quite at the level of CJ Stroud yet, but again, over the weekend, played really tough in that game against the Rams, who have shown up probably a lot better than we thought they would, and a lot of other people thought they would this season. They fell deep behind. Richardson didn't panic. That Colts offense didn't panic. And you look around and, with the exception of Michael Pittman, who I think only had one reception in that game, he doesn't, again, have big name receivers to throw the ball to. You're looking at the depth chart and it's Alex Ogletree, it's Mo Ali Cox and Josh Downs, but he's moving the ball around. Didn't have to lean on anyone in particular last weekend to pull the Colts back from a big deficit, and he can use his legs when it's not happening and when things aren't opening up, pitching in another 56 yards on the ground. He's a one-man offense, and that, again, shows the value, as we've talked about with D'Amico Ryans. He's got the right coach there who seems to know, just like he did with Jalen Hurts, how to get the best out of a guy with exactly Anthony Richardson's talent profile.
Yeah, I was trying to think of, a cartoon comparison for Anthony Richardson. And ultimately, Connor, I had to go with all four of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because I think he brings that much to the party. I mean, this is a guy who can use his legs, right? And has all the athletic ability. But we've seen how smart he is and what a leader he is as well. And I am a huge believer in Shane Steichen. I love what he did with the Chargers. I love what he did with the Eagles. I think his feel for the offensive side and the right play to call at the right time is second to none. I think he went into a very difficult situation in Indianapolis. I think they had an off-season beset by their owner getting involved in a situation. I think they've handled that as well as they can. It's a roster with a lot of holes. It's a roster without enormous talent on the offensive side of the ball, but they're finding ways to really open up the game plan. And I think his ability to run means that the floor is maybe higher than some of the others. But we knew he was really raw coming into this. This is a guy, 13 games. I mean, I don't think you can, really overstate how raw he was, but he has not looked out of place at all. He has been really, really impressive. And, I know there were some of those charts and graphs flying about social media today, but ultimately, like in terms of EPA, he's massively contributing. Like when he is on the field, good things tend to happen.
Let's talk about Bryce Young while we're on the subject of rookies, and he certainly hasn't been lights out. Nowhere near hitting the stride, the sort of heights of the two quarterbacks we've just talked about. Panthers, of course, sitting at 0-4, and Bryce has had to deal with injury as well, which hasn't helped his start to the season. In many ways, I suppose his 0-4 start looks like the typical baptism of fire that we see for NFL quarterbacks, whereas Stroud and Richardson, to a certain extent, to be fair, have been outliers, but maybe a little bit of sign of improvement over last weekend's game against the Vikings.
So some baby steps. For me, it feels a little bit like Mr. Potato Head. The pieces are a little bit all over the place at the moment, and I feel for Bryce Young, because he's gone into a situation where the Panthers kind of had given up significant capital to go and get him, and therefore they don't have the weapons. Adam Thielen, I think, had come in, and he did look much better against his old team. He was playing through injury for the first couple of weeks, and at least we didn't see Bryce turn the ball over this week. It is, look, for anyone, QBs can take different amounts of time to get used to the league and go back. Some of the greats have really struggled early on, especially when you go to a poor team. So I think he is in a setting where he has a very competent coaching staff. I hope that he will continue to take, strides, but when you go number one overall, there is going to be that extra scrutiny. It will forever be a talking point in your NFL career, however long you are in the league. And the fact that he is being outshone thus far by the two players who went after him means that there is extra pressure there. But he didn't turn the ball over. I think that he can take some comfort from that, but it is baby steps. We do need to see him continue to grow, where because of the 17th game, Connor, traditionally this would be the quarter, it'd be 1/4 of the way through the season already. And we're yet to really see the even prolonged flashes of what made him so special in Alabama. That would be a slight concern, but it is very early.
I was going to say, and you took the words right out of my mouth, it really doesn't help that the guys who went after you in your draft class have found themselves hitting the ground running, and you're going to suffer by comparison there. I suppose it also doesn't help that other franchises that we may have expected to struggle, not only the Texans and the Colts, but you can throw the Cardinals in there as well, have been surprisingly spicy. And the Panthers, who we talked about their coaching staff being something akin to the Avengers with all of the talent that they have there, and maybe slightly higher expectations for the Panthers, all things considered, hasn't yet come to fruition. So that's not making for an easy backdrop for him. We'll move on from rookies though, Colin, and talk about maybe some of the seasoned pros who have, I'm not going to say roll back the clock. It's not like Lamar Jackson is too superannuated at this stage, but another 2-touchdown rushing game for him. Also another couple of passes to Mark Andrews, who's been saying how blessed the Ravens are to have him, and that certainly looks to be the case at the moment.
Lamar is magic. He absolutely is phenomenal. I'm not in the least bit surprised. I was banging the table all last year for the Ravens to get it done. I cannot understand why they didn't get it done quicker. I cannot understand why they didn't put the weapons around him. He's a magician. He can beat you any which way. You want him to beat you on the ground, he can do that. You want to beat through the air, he can do that. He's prepared. People focused again last year on the games. I'm tired of myself talking about it. Players are allowed to make business decisions, right? Franchises do it all the time. Franchises hold all the aces generally. The franchise tag, the ability to trade players when they want to. I can't blame the kid for looking after his health. The the punishment players put themselves through. And he's seen plenty of his teammates go and get injured. But now he's got the contract and he's putting the team on his back because they have a significant amount of injuries. And they are the team now well in control of the North. There's a long and rocky road to go for sure. But it's like, at times watching Popeye, because he'll be out there and the things won't be going exactly right, and all of a sudden Lamar has that ability to just take a game over and to drive them on. And that, to me, he has been immensely impressive. And while I would probably actually say, it's interesting we're having the QB conversation, I would say the front runner for MVP right now, after 4 weeks, it's early, for me would be Christian McCaffrey, but I think Lamar would be deserving to be in the conversation.
Yeah, I'd have Lamar in there. We'll get to Justin Herbert in a bit as well. I'd say he's very much in that conversation as well. Maybe it's been slightly under the radar because the Chargers have been so up and down, but it's certainly not on his back that they're in the position that they're in. One of the things about the Ravens over the weekend I thought was particularly impressive, and look, you can't legislate for the fact that Deshaun Watson was out, and that didn't help the Browns in terms of complementary football, but that defense has bullied every other team that they've played, including the Bengals. They've been going around bloodying people's noses, kicking sand in their face. Lamar wasn't having any of that. He made them look ordinary. If you can do that against that Browns defense, you can do it against anyone. And look, as you've said, Lamar is a magician, but when he has that wand working the way he wants, it's just watch out, isn't it? I mean, we talked about the AFC North being a bloodbath. He's making a mockery of all those predictions now. The Ravens are sitting pretty, and with the woes that the Bengals have, and we'll get to that in a bit. Steelers probably haven't really been as advertised either. The Browns have been up and down, clearly not helped with that Deshaun Watson injury situation at the moment. And any hopes that they might have that their defense could carry them certainly fell by the wayside when you're looking at the way that Lamar can use his own personal weapons. If they're not going to put weapons around him, he'll just go into his own arsenal when he needs to. That's the Lamar magic, really. Matthew Stafford is another one who, has really rolled back the years, Colin. And the Rams have been, as we said, a lot better than a lot of people expected them to be. Not hurt in any way by the fact that they've unearthed a couple of gems there in Puka Nacua, who's one of the talks of the rookie class. Kyron Williams has been a real standout for them as well, and they found different ways to get it done. Albeit that they kind of let the Colts back in the game at the weekend. Stafford able to lead one of those game-winning drives when it mattered most in overtime. And as long as he's there and as long as he's healthy, and he did get dinged in the hip and was kind of limping around a bit towards the end of the game, which reminds you that body can break down and betray him, unfortunately, as is the case for anyone at that age. But as long as he stays healthy, the Rams look like they could annoy quite a lot of teams on that side of the draw.
Yeah, and they surprised me. I put my hand up. I thought that they would struggle much more than they have. We knew that Sean McVay is a gifted coach. We know that Aaron Donald is the most gifted defensive player of his generation. But they were without Boomhauer, essentially from King of the Hill. If anyone has heard Cooper Kupp speak, you will know what I'm talking about. But yeah, Puka Nacua has been absolutely sensational. And Stafford he came out earlier in the summer and he talked about, he had to find a way to connect with the younger receivers. And people took it as he wasn't connecting with them as such, but I think he was trying to figure out how he was going to do that. And my goodness, has he done that? Because Nacua, 163 yards again against the Colts, the winning touchdown. Sean McVay looks absolutely re-energized. I don't know if you saw, and if people watching and listening would have seen the video in the locker room afterwards. He looks like a man reborn. He is absolutely loving these rookies, and they're responding to him. Again, they you rightly point out, they let the Colts back into it. There is a long season to go. They have a very tough game coming up against the Eagles, even though they'll be welcoming the Eagles. But after that, they've got the Cardinals and the Steelers. They're both winnable games. So by the kind of midway point, they've got the Cowboys and the Packers, then you'd certainly say they could give the Packers a game. So by the midway point of the season, they could be a surprise. And depending how the NFC plays out, they could make a playoff run. I mean, yeah, they'll have to keep the guys fit and going. But I have been impressed, and Stafford and Aaron Donald have shown real leadership.
Well, that the NFC side of the draw is very interesting. I mean, nobody, right, Eagles and 49ers aside, it looks like they're running away with anything right now. It looks like a lot of teams are still going to be in the mix late into the season. And as you say, probably the most exciting thing about the Rams, and they've been exciting to watch, and that was one of the more entertaining games, even in what was a very entertaining slate of games last weekend. Probably the most exciting thing about all of it is, as you say, just how energized McVay is. And you realize that we talked about it in the offseason. Would he be up for it this year? It looked like a steep climb to try and rebuild from where they were. We've talked about the cost and the bill to be paid for going all in the way that they did, and just how many young players they had on their roster. But we also talked about the fact that coaching matters, and the broadcast booze loss is very much football's game again when you see what he's been able to do, and see they probably got a bit lucky as well in the talent that they have. There's no guarantees that every GM is a genius when you get a Puka Nacua, right? You can pick up a receiver like that in the 5th round. You're sitting pretty. No guarantees there, but they're going to continue to be exciting to watch. As you say, you wouldn't write them off being in the wild card race come the end of the season. Who knows what way that one's going to go. Baker Mayfield is another one. We talked about by week 4, you kind of have a good idea of who's hot and who's not. The Baker Mayfield honeymoon hasn't quite come to an end just yet, and we maybe suggested that the luster would wear off fairly quickly, but so far so good from a Bucs perspective. Slightly surprising win over the weekend against the Saints. They'd obviously beaten the Vikings, upset them week 1. That NFC South is going to be a wild ride. We've always said that, and they're far from out of it.
No, they another one of the surprise teams, certainly. And to me, when I was looking for what cartoon character could Baker be, it's Yogi Bear. Because he's got his smarts, but you do wonder, what shenanigans he might get himself up to at some point. The Baker's having fun. Right, and when Baker is...
Does that make Todd Bowles the Ranger, or is he boo-boo in this analogy? I'm trying to figure out. Where's the picnic basket? What is the picnic basket?
I think Todd Bowles is definitely the Ranger, and the Glazers can be boo-boo perhaps. Baker. Now we're going to have to see what the story is with Mike Evans and what that injury looks like, because he is an important piece, and I think it's a hamstring injury. And I don't think they've kind of given a timeline on exactly how long he might be out for as yet. But Baker has talent, right? There's no doubting that. Like, he showed that in college, and he showed that in flashes. I mean, he went to the playoffs, and with the Rams, he showed flashes. Again, we have to see how he's going to do when the Bucs maybe have a real kind of blip, and can he overcome the real adversity there. They have, again, like, you look at the kind of the next few games, and like, it's the Lions, that'll be a tough one. Then they've got the Falcons, then of course they got the Bills, the Texans, the Titans, and the 49ers. So again, we will know, I'd say, by the time Thanksgiving rolls around, really how it's looking. But for right now, Baker has been, they were supposed to tank. They really were supposed to be in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. Absolutely not. They are looking at the South and thinking, there's no reason we can't win this.
But we've talked about it. We talked about it in the context of the Cardinals column, that players are playing for their jobs and players are proud. And the Bucs, we maybe thought, maybe their vets are over the hill now, and they're not going to be able to get the band back together for one last run. But this clutch of guys there with Super Bowl rings in that locker room on both sides of the ball. You can run through their roster and look at a lot of big names there, and they're not going to go away quietly. And if you say, as you say, if Baker rolls, the Bucs can continue to roll. There's plenty of middling teams in the NFC side that they can pick off in the form that they're in, and they've already proven that they're well up to going toe to toe with pretty much anyone that's there. They haven't run into one of the buzzsaws on that side of the draw yet, but there aren't that many. It's not the AFC, and you can stack wins if you're continuing to play the way that he is and the way that they are, and it could be interesting. Mike Evans' injury, as you say, let's see how that pans out, because that deprives them of a big part of the offense if he goes down. But it's been an interesting watch, a lot more interesting than people expected. I mean, we'll get to the Bears later on, but there aren't too many teams who look like they're actively tanking. Like the Caleb Williams sweepstakes might be a lot less interesting than we had predicted, perhaps, before the season started.
Yeah, certainly. I think there'll be quite a few teams. It's a strange one, like, because people always kind of look at strength of schedule in the summer, and then it changes very much. Where there'll be teams that thought, "Wow, our schedule is relatively kind," and all of a sudden are thinking, "Uh-oh," and other teams who really thought they faced a real gauntlet, like the Bills, for example, who now will be thinking, we need to show up and we need to do our job, but there is a path for the Bills potentially to the number 1 seed in the AFC.
You're watching the Irish NFL show. We are looking at our week 4 talking points. We've been talking about quarterbacks that have been performing, and in some cases outperforming what we might have expected before the season starts. Colin, let's turn to some of the signal callers who haven't yet hit the mark. You saw him in the flesh over the weekend. Desmond Ridder for the Falcons is one where he's in a good situation. There's a lot to like about what Arthur Smith does. Bijan Robinson has been absolutely electric. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a Falcons fan who, like you, was at the game in London over the weekend, and not his first rodeo, but he was saying you kind of forget when you're in the stadium. The good players look so much better than they even look on television, but boy, did the bad players stand out. And when he said that, he was talking about Desmond Ridder.
Yeah, at the moment, Connor, Desmond Ridder is Homer Simpson, because he's sitting in front of the control panel in the nuclear plant, and the buttons are all in front of him, but he just doesn't seem to know what one he should press.
But like Homer, he has the bird that just drinks the water. He has all those running backs around him. He's got all that talent in the backfield. Just hand the ball to the bird and let the bird dip its beak in the water.
That's Bijan, Bijan is the way in which he moves, the way in which he makes players miss. He is electric. Like
even the Toy Story animation of Bijan was jaw dropping.
Like one of the interesting things, I suppose, about London this time around was that it felt more like a home game for the Jags, which I think is good. Because while it's great that like everyone goes, there's a novelty element to it, and at this point, we're so long into this that the novelty needs to wear off a little bit, and it needs to feel a bit more like a game stateside if it is to be sustainable long term, and it did have that. But you could even sense the Jags fans, the concern when Bijan had the ball, and for the Falcons fans who were there and everybody else, the excitement. But Ridder, he's not it, and they got off to a good start, I suppose, against maybe opponents who were caught cold or just weren't very good. But when you're talking, 6 points in one game, 7 in the other, and just the interceptions that he's thrown have been really poor, especially when you kind of consider some of the talent that's there, and he's just not seeing the field. Now,
any defense that's good enough to stop the run and to force him to beat them with his arm is going to come out on top. You just feel that they're just. It's not that there isn't a plan B, and I'm not disrespecting Arthur Smith, but so much of it is going to rely on what Ridder does and what he doesn't do, and when it's not there, it gets ugly quickly.
Yeah, it really does. Now, Arthur Smith is going to stick with him, he says, for the foreseeable. If he continues to struggle, will he be able to do that? I think the clamour from fans will mean that they will certainly. Now, Arthur Smith is a man of his convictions, so we'll see. I mean, the thing is that like his completion percentage is over 60%, but the issue is that he's not connecting on any of the deep shots. Like he's not like the couple of deep shots that he did take the other day, it never looked likely that it was going to come off. And I think you're dead right. Like for the Falcons, it all comes down to Bijan, and it can't only be Bijan. Like Bijan is supposed to be like Christian McCaffrey, that piece to unlock everything else. But when he's your only piece, then there's only so much he can do. Taylor Heineke isn't the answer either long term. So you wonder what the Falcons are going to do, because given the rest of the roster, they're not going to be in the top QB sweepstakes, but they've got to figure something out, because they are going to waste the talent on this roster.
Let's talk Daniel Jones next. He was sacked 11 times at the weekend, and that's not a fun outing for anyone under center. But probably what was most striking is how annoyed Brian Daboll seemed to get with him over the one pick in particular, which was the 97-yard return for Weatherspoon, the pick six, when the Giants were in danger of turning it into a one-possession game. And you could see Daboll seething in the post-game interview as well. This was supposed to be the Daniel Jones of the past. Daboll and the new coaching staff had a big impact in ironing that out of his game, or so we thought. But if he's going to do that, and they're going to have such lackluster outings on offense, that's not starting to look like money well spent, as you've been saying for a long time.
Yeah. This was my concern with Daniel Jones, and to me, I don't understand why the Giants made the decision that they did. Like, I don't like the franchise tag. I just talked about the teams having all the power. I don't like it, but it exists. And this is the exact scenario it exists for, where you needed to see another year. Like Daboll came in last year. There was an enormous feel-good factor in New York. They benefited a little bit from, some scheduling where it kind of worked in their favor. But he's not it. Like he's so limited in terms of what he brings to the table, and I know he can run, but he turns the ball over, and you did see Daboll get annoyed, which he can do, but he generally doesn't. You don't see coaches get annoyed with their franchise QB, the guy, and they've given him a contract, which means that essentially they are tied to him for the next couple of years. There's no real get out. They're going to have to run it back next year. Now, depending on where they draft, of course, you might have Jones start the first 5 games of next year. Look, they've a very good coaching staff, but I suppose all teams are guilty of this. I've seen the Denver guilty of this. Talk up your weapons, right? Talk, and ultimately they fail to deliver. And the O-line is an enormous issue, and how they have allowed themselves to get into a situation where the O-line is that bad. Like, it really wouldn't matter who you had behind there.
And that's a fair point. We can talk about, and I think there's some justification to this. People will say, well, sacks are a quarterback stat as well, but no quarterback gets sacked 11 times by their own hand. That's not Daniel Jones making bad decisions or hanging on to the ball too often. That's, give me some help here, guys. Make a few blocks.
Yeah, but with all of it, like, he feels a little bit like Patrick from SpongeBob, where he's a likable character. He's trying his best, but it's just not working. And he's just not the long-term answer there. And if somebody like Daboll, who is gifted in working with QBs and tends to game plan for their strengths, can't do it. And again, this is not just one game. Like, he, outside of the comeback against the Cardinals, he has struggled massively this season. I mean, he has, and it's not you feel bad for the player themselves, but Armstead was openly mocking him on Twitter today. Like, players players laughing at him, and that's just a horrible place to be in. But I saw with Russell Wilson last year. It's not good. It's very difficult to dig yourself out of there.
Yeah, when no Saquon, I mean, you really see what a crutch and a comfort blanket that's been. When you've got a fully fit Saquon, it eases the load on Jones and helps him look a lot more credible. But ex Barkley, that offense looks very, very ordinary. It's one of the worst performing units in the NFL, where there are a lot of poorly performing offenses at the moment. To be fair, one of them is in New England, where Mac Jones had the ignominy of seeing himself replaced again, and we saw this for a little bit last season after the Bears, of all teams, chased Mac Jones out of the game and brought Bailey Zappi to the field. Jones threw one interception in particular, which, I mean, anybody watching the game could see a mile off. He didn't need the all-22 version to go, no, don't do that. And Mac Jones is one of those players, and we talk about it over and over again. The ceiling is low. You are not Patrick Mahomes. So I don't know what tape you're watching or who you think you are. You cannot make that throw. And if you're going to do that, expect Belichick to bring out the shepherd's crook, because you're going to be pulled to the bench. He has such low margin for error, and it doesn't seem like he is prepared to, is willing to, or is able to live within it. And I don't think that the Patriots are blameless here as well. They haven't exactly filled the larder around him, to be fair to Mac Jones, and Bailey Zappi isn't the answer either. That's more punishment for Jones than it is a reward for Zappi. But Jones looked competent in year one. He looked like a guy who could live within his limits. Now he just looks like, A, he's not the guy, and B, he's not even maximizing what potential he has.
No, to me, he's scrappy do. He thinks he's far more important than he actually is. And I think in that first season, Connor, he was willing to work within his limitations, and now he thinks he can work beyond them, and he can't. He doesn't have the arm talent to do that. He doesn't have the processing ability to do that. Again, he could at the college level, but he can't now. And it is a real issue for the Patriots, because Zappi isn't the answer, and any of the kind of fervor that existed when Zappi came in last year and it's Zappi time, well, he couldn't even complete 50% of his passes. And I know the Cowboys defense are outstanding. Though I will say, if you're a Cowboys fan watching that, or you're Jerry Jones, where was that against the Cardinals? Like, how do teams go? I mean, that is an issue the Cowboys have to address, right? Because this keeps happening. And when you are a team that are capable of just not showing up one week, well, that's a switch that doesn't magically change in the playoffs, and so they need to get that figured out. But when they're on it, they are on it. And for the Patriots, Judon is now injured. I mean, like, where are they going? Like, is it the case? And for Bill Belichick, like, how long? They're not going to fire him mid-season in any way, shape, or form. But I suppose it depends where they're picking next year. Maybe does Bill want to be the guy, if they get a high enough pick, to try to rebuild it again? I mean, ultimately they waited for Mac Jones to fall to them the last time. Might he be tempted to go up? We know he wants to chase Don Shula's record, but he seems a million miles away from it at the moment. And I don't know how you go about fixing Mac Jones.
You're not making that ground up quickly either, are you? I mean, they're probably thankful for the Rodgers injury, because it leaves the Jets as easy picking, and nobody's picked on them more than Belichick has. But they look so far off where the Dolphins are, albeit that they lost at the weekend, and certainly where the Bills are. I mean, they're not competitive in the AFC East next year either, you would think. It's going to be a while before they can get anywhere near hanging onto the coattails of the two teams that are racing away in front of them in their own division, before you even get into some of the sharks that swim in the wider sea there.
Yeah, like the AFC is it's interesting every year, and every year it offers you surprises.
Speaking of surprises, people may be surprised that we're even discussing his name, or we have it in our mouths in this segment where we're talking about QBs who haven't necessarily performed. Controversial one, albeit, but should we have Patrick Mahomes in this category through two awful picks at the weekend? Lazy throws, if anything. He's. We're not seriously suggesting that Patrick Mahomes isn't going to perform this season, but that was an uncharacteristic display at the weekend. They came away with the win, but it was as much about the Jets' deficiencies as it was about anything great that he did.
Well, it's the first time in his college professional career that he has been out thrown in terms of yards, and he has thrown more interceptions than touchdowns, which tells you right where things are at for Patrick Mahomes. All players go through a little bit of ups and downs, and think about, we're talking about Patrick Mahomes not having a fantastic start to the season in terms of where he's at, really, right? Because he's not living up to where he has been. But Patrick Mahomes has essentially changed the way in which we look at the QB position. Like, he is one of one in this league. And yeah, he's a little bit below where he would usually be. His completion percentage is under 65%, which is the we haven't seen since he became the starter in the league, and that, I suppose, in and of itself is a little bit interesting. And his interception percentage is the highest that it's been. But I suppose defenses are always. There's always going to be a response to the response, and the Chiefs last year showed, what they're capable of doing. I have no doubt that Patrick Mahomes is going to go back to the drawing board, and you will see him renewed, refreshed, and as good as ever. I don't think we can doubt Mahomes. I think this is some poor form, and all players who across all sports have it, and that's all it is.
And having made the case for the prosecution, I'm going to flip against myself and make the case for the defense. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Like, we're having a bit of fun here, obviously, and throwing Mahomes into that category for the devilment of it. But he looks to me like, and I think there's a few things going on. Firstly, that Chiefs offense isn't as high powered or operating at as high octane a level as we've seen them over the last couple of seasons. They're very reliant on Kelsey because they don't have Tyreek Hill as they once did. They don't have some of the other weapons that they had. So Mahomes himself has to be a bit more creative. He also looks to me like at times he's trying things almost to amuse himself, because he can still win games, without necessarily being on point every game. He doesn't need to be at his best in week 4. He knows that. He's got 2 rings. He knows exactly what's needed to get through the season and when they need to go. They didn't need to do that against the Jets at the weekend. They didn't need to do it certainly against the Bears the previous weekend. I think when you need it, it's there. And part of me thinks he's almost going to the more underused part of the amazing locker that he has of tricks and experimenting with things, which is a nuts thing to be able to say at NFL level. But such is the rarefied air in which he operates, I think he can get away with it, and so far he is getting away with it. Before we leave the QBs who haven't been performing, I'm not sure where we necessarily sit on, and I know I have my own view, but I'd be interested in getting yours after the events of the weekend. Where does Justin Fields sit? Through 4 TDs, went for over 300 yards passing for the first time in his NFL career. Didn't even have an incompletion until just before halftime, and at that, that was a Hail Mary that didn't come off just before the end of the half. Yes, there was the predictable, unfortunately for Bears fans, interception on what might have been the game-tying drive, which was a bit deflating. There was another costly fumble, which I'm not necessarily sure you put all on his back, but there was an awful lot of good from a Fields perspective over the weekend, which I know has got a lot of Bears fans saying, see, Fields isn't the problem. Maybe he is him. What do you reckon?
I think it's a lot of woulda, coulda, shoulda from a Bears perspective. Like, this should have been year 1 where they were leaning into Justin Fields and helping him grow. when you take a player that high, you've got to look to do everything you can to help them develop. And I just, the way things ended, it's difficult to, especially with the Bears are 1-2 at the moment, right? You can't tell me that if they're picking 1-2, they're not moving off of Justin Fields. And could he have a Ryan Tannehill-esque career? Potentially. I mean, it all depends on where he ends up next and how that goes. You saw the flashes there, but you saw the good and the bad. You would love to see them have more weapons, but I just don't think they've ever done him justice, really. And yeah, some of that is absolutely on him, but from the off, right? Think about the way in which D'Amico Ryans and when we talked earlier about Shane Steichen and how they have looked to immediately buffer their young QBs, build them up, make things as easy as possible for them. Look at what the Eagles did with Jalen Hurts. Look what the Bills did with Josh Allen. Now look at the teams that didn't do that, and ultimately that's where the Bears are. I think there's fault on Fields for not making more of the opportunities he has gotten, but I think ultimately when you are a multi-billion-dollar franchise, right? If the Bears were to sell in the morning, the Bears would sell for far more than the Commanders, given the history that is there in Chicago. But they've now lost 14 games on the bounce, which is the most in Bears history. There are problems. Justin Fields is a problem, but he's not the biggest problem.
Yeah, and I wonder, like the GM Ryan Poles getting a lot of heat, and Poles was kind of getting a pass from Bears fans, and you've touched on some of the problems there, because Fields wasn't Poles' guy. He's not responsible for drafting him, so he's kind of seems to have looked on this as a show me something type year for Fields. If you show me something, then we'll put more resources behind it next year. But I don't think that's right. I think, case in point, Orlando Brown's available. Go ahead and get Orlando Brown. If you're really serious about strengthening your offensive line, the Bears had so much salary cap room, it wasn't even funny. They could have gone out and gotten some blue chip guys on both lines, and they didn't. So they're kind of lukewarm on what they were willing to do for Fields. And yeah, they got DJ Moore as a weapon, and Moore has certainly been pretty much as advertised, although questions over how well Luke Getsy has schemed to get him open on occasions, and some of the decisions that have been made there and some of the play calling. But it's, the fish rots from the head, as somebody's saying in our comments there. And the Bears have not done right by Fields or by themselves in the way that they've handled this from beginning to end. A lot of people talking about cleaning house, but do you go for the full house clean this year? Do you take the GM out as well? I don't think for one second the McCaskies are going to do that as the Bears owners. That's just not how they roll. But you would wonder, with potentially the opportunity to get, as it stands, as you say, that with the number 1 and number 2 picks in next year's draft, they could be looking at Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison if that's the way they wanted to go. Those are serious weapons if you have DJ Moore. But then, is Poles actually going to go out and do the surgery on both lines, do a Howie Roseman, and really dig deep in the trenches to make sure that whoever comes in, coaching staff or new QB, if that's the way that they go, that they're actually set up to succeed rather than to set up to fail. Let's talk about QBs about whom there's pretty much no doubt, Colin, before we leave our QB chat. We got a group of 3 here: Josh Allen, Tua, and Justin Herbert, who have been just performing at such a high level. We talked about Josh Allen in week 1 and how week 1 can fool you, looking back in retrospect, saying he's got to stop playing hero ball. You don't want to coach the Josh out of Josh. But the version of Josh Allen we've seen since then has been absolutely the guy who looks like he can steer the Bills to that Lombardi.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Allen he's brilliant. He was my MVP, I suppose, prediction before the season began, and he is Taz from Tasmania in the way he approaches it. It's all action all the time. Everything's happening. And yeah, occasionally you end up with these like the first game of the season, where he's almost trying too hard, right? And he comes out and he feels he has to make the play, and we've discussed that. But Benjamin Salak from The Ringer was tweeting about the fact that the teams that have scored 37 points or more on the bounce in 3 weeks in succession, the last 4 teams to do it, right? Three of there have been the 49ers, and on 3 other occasions the Bills. So when Josh Allen gets hot, he gets incredibly hot. It feels a bit like a younger version, or younger Wayne Rooney, when he used to go on those streaky spells where he'd score, goals for kind of 8, 9, 10 weeks on the trot. Allen has talked himself about the need to find the middle ground, and you saw him do things, I suppose, at the game at the weekend, where he slid early on. He didn't try to hurdle anybody. Now, I think that the meter will top back up and you'll see him continue to do crazy things. But ultimately, he offers you things that no other QB. Patrick Mahomes is a better quarterback, absolutely. But Josh Allen can do things that no other quarterback in the league can do. And it looks like the relationship with Stefon Diggs is fully repaired. I think we can safely say that. And the Bills, it's early, but they were mighty impressive against the Dolphins, and hopefully for their sake, some lessons have been learned about their approach to the regular season and the playoffs from the past couple of years.
Yeah, Josh certainly outdueled Tua at the weekend, as you rightly point out, but that should take nothing away from the way Tua has started this season. It's incredible how quick he gets the ball out, how decisive he is. Now, he's got serious playmakers around him, but to be fair to Tua, it's hard to see anybody else making more of what's around him than he has. He's been outstanding.
Yeah, he has in fairness. Like, I think he probably, what Tua brings to the Dolphins is exactly what you want, right? He has the anticipation and the ability to get the ball out quickly. He is very, very smart. We know that. To me, I went with Optimus Prime for Tua because he's the leader, but he's part of it, and that, like, Dolphins offense is kind of Transformers-esque. Now, the Bills did a really good job of taking away the center of the field. And that will be interesting. Again, we talked about the response to the response. So now we have seen a team. Can other teams do that? It's difficult. I think the Bills have a very gifted defensive mind in Sean McDermott. I think the personnel that they had allowed them to do it. Matt Milano, there are very few linebackers like Matt Milano in the league. So it'll be interesting.
We saw the Patriots put it up to them as well. I mean, the Patriots didn't have the offense to make it count, but Dolphins certainly didn't find it easy to move the ball, and they took away Tyreek Hill, as the Bills did over the weekend, and made them win with their plan B.
Yeah, but I think that the difference for the Dolphins this year in comparison to previous years is the fact that they do have a plan B. Previously, I think if you took things away, they really struggled. Now we need to see Tua get better and continue to grow. But you would have to say that for them, the next couple of weeks are the Giants and the Panthers before they face into a really tough stretch where they play the Eagles, the Patriots again, and the Chiefs and on the bounce. So they need to get back to winning ways over the next couple of weeks.
The Chargers were back to winning ways over the weekend. Justin Herbert is obviously a huge part of that column. He's had a great season so far. And, as we said earlier on in the show, that hasn't always necessarily shone in the way, say, Allen has for the Bills or Tua has for the Dolphins, because they haven't been able to stack wins, and they've had some bad decisions from Brian's favorite, Brandon Staley, to contend with over the season. But whatever they've done on offense and having Kellen Moore on board has really helped them. We saw Herbert the week before last weekend throw over 45. I think he threw 47 passes, completed 40 of them, just looked like he could will the ball wherever he wanted. And when he's in that type of form, he's so exciting to watch. He's, arguably the most exciting quarterback to watch when he has his mojo.
He can be. I mean, it's interesting. He goes from from that 400 yards to just over 160 at the weekend. He's got so much ability. To me though, it feels a little bit like Spider-Man, because in Spider-Man, Peter Parker has all the ability, all the talent, but everything is always so last minute, and he always finds himself in these jams, and that's kind of what it is for Herbert. And I think we'll come back to the head coach, but Herbert has all the ability, and he finds ways a lot of the time to get it done, but they've struggled to get the running game going again. That's a huge issue. And the Raiders, the Raiders are not a good football team. They're not a well-coached team. They're a team with real issues. So the Chargers will have been pleased, and although it's a divisional game, but how far Herbert can take this team, I think, will be limited by his head coach.
Well, let's talk about coaching, Colin. You've set up the segue there nicely. After week 4, it's still very early in the season. It's only the first quarter of the season, as you pointed out, or would be if we hadn't moved to 17 games, which makes it slightly harder to divide. But if we're talking about coaches under pressure, you've kind of alluded to a couple of them there, but give me no pleasure to say probably top of the pile at the moment is Matt Eberflus. Like, it's very hard to make the case for the defense there, the way the Bears have gone this season. He doesn't have all the talent in the world, but he sure as hell has a lot more than he did last season, when the Bears, despite losing 10 games in a row, at least looked competitive, even against some of the better teams in the league. They were right in a lot of those games, lost a lot of one-score games. They lost the one-score game at the weekend, but a game in which they were 28-7 up before he made a terrible decision. And I'll caveat that, right? It's 4th and 1. You haven't won in 13 games. A lot of people are shouting at the TV going, just take the points, just take the points. You don't need to be too cute here. Don't go for it on 4th down. I will say in Eberflus's defense, I don't necessarily think it's 100% the wrong call to go for it. What killed me was they burn a timeout trying to call the defense offside, and that doesn't work. They then call up a play that doesn't surprise anyone. And that timeout proves costly, because then you've got no way to stop the clock when you're trying to drive to win the game. And that ultimately forces their hand, and probably helps lead to Justin Fields throwing the interception on the last offensive play in the game. Eberflus has not set the Bears up well. He's obviously dealing with the loss of his defensive coordinator. And it's hard to know where they're going to turn here, having lost to the Broncos. And unfortunately, a lot of this mess lies on his shoulders.
Yeah, I think you've captured it really well there. Kind of, to me, watching the Bears, it's a bit like, do you remember The Animals of Farthing Wood? And you'd watch it, and you'd almost, as a child, be covering your eyes because something terrible was going to happen. One of the animals was going to die in a really horrific way. And that's ultimately what watching this Bears team is like. They're going to find a way to ruin it for themselves. And the head coach, just like that decision not to kick the field goal, like, he went against the stats. Like, the decision, like, where are you making the call? Like, again, if you're rolling, like, sometimes I get decisions to go for it, right? I can understand that desire, but ultimately the Bears offense had really stalled at that point, right? They weren't rolling. This was not the first half where everything was going right. And so that's a point. Like, it's not just the stats you have to look at. It's the ebb and flow of the game, where you're at that particular time. And you look at the Claypool stuff, right? He's like a deer in the headlights when he gets asked about it. Even today, he still doesn't know what to say. And I know there's other people obviously have to be involved in that, but how are you so ill prepared for the press when you know what questions are coming?
Yeah, and that you can't even take the opportunity. Like, if you want to throw somebody under the bus, there's hardly a more popular candidate than Chase Claypool, right? Bears fans have completely turned against him, and rightly so, based on the lack of effort on field and the way he stirred up controversy off field. Nobody's going to be calling for Eberflus's head over that. You have an obvious scapegoat here, and you refuse to use it for whatever reason. It also, the Bears backed off Jalen Carter in the draft, and the rationale that came out, even though they've never said so on the record, was clearly, well, we're not so sure about him from a character perspective. Well, then why the hell did you trade for Chase Claypool? A guy with a known history of being a disruptive locker room presence. There's a reason the Steelers were happy to get rid of him. They were happier still to get what effectively turned out to be almost a first round pick. It was the 32nd overall pick of the draft, because the Dolphins didn't have a first round pick in last year's draft. One of the players whom they could have taken with that pick, of course, if the Bears had held on to it, would have been Marvin Mims, who ended up killing them on the Dolphins' field goal drive to win that game after Eberflus's tough call to go for it on 4th and 1. But like you say there, you judge the scenario, you judge where your team is at. There's 4.5 minutes left to go in that game when Eberflus makes the call. So in other circumstances, you could argue, well, there's still a lot of time for your defense to have to hold out, and maybe you're better off going for the points, particularly when your defense hasn't been playing well. But he's the guy who's calling the defense. If they're not playing well, that's on him. So no matter which way you look at it, this is a pretty hot seat. Josh McDaniels, another one. You've had the Josh McDaniels roller coaster in the past to deal with, Colin, and it doesn't look like panning out any differently in Las Vegas to the way it did in Denver. And for some reason, Josh McDaniels just doesn't seem to have learned from his past failures. He's rubbing people up the wrong way. He's making poor calls, and it's just not working out so well in Vegas.
Yeah, no, he's a disaster, and he is Cyril Sneer from the Raccoons, if people remember the Raccoons, because he's always right, and he threw a rookie QB who was making his NFL debut against a really bad O-line and managed to hang in there. And yes, he started the game really poorly, but ultimately he stuck in there. He didn't let his head drop, and the Chargers had to dig deep to get the win. And Josh McDaniels went up there and basically made out that the entire loss was on the rookie QB. He's not liked. He wasn't liked in Denver. I can't imagine he's liked. I know the fans don't like him. I can't imagine he's liked in the locker room, because when players see a coach who is willing to throw a player under the bus like that. Like, think about last year, right? When Goff had some struggles for the Lions, right? And who are flying and brilliant. And think about the way in which Dan Campbell wasn't shy or wasn't afraid to call Goff out at times and to highlight Jared needs to play better, but I need to put Jared in better situations. It's also on me. And he always looked to do that. Josh McDaniels does not do that. It's the Josh show, and Josh is always right. But Josh is going to be out in his ear very soon. The only thing stopping Vegas is the payoff.
Yeah. I know we've probably talked about Brandon Staley a lot in the past, so maybe we'll give Staley a pass just to mention.
The only thing I'll say on him, he is Charlie Brown. He never learns. He continues to try to kick the football, and Lucy keeps pulling it away.
Two key coaches I want to discuss who perhaps some people might be surprised that they're on this list, but with a certain degree of justification, I would argue. The first is Brian Daboll. We touched on him before. Might seem crazy that his butt would be on the hot seat so early, but when your offense shows up as poorly as his had, shut out, 6 points in one game, 3 points in another game, it's bad, and the signs of tension between him and Daniel Jones do not bode well for the season ahead. Is there a scenario in which Daboll could be headed for the exit door?
Oh, I wouldn't say that. I think again, maybe if things continue with Daniel Jones, we'll get a few more insights into who ultimately made the decision. But I don't think the Giants have a good roster. I look at that roster, particularly on offense, and I think, and I say that as somebody who thinks the Broncos don't have a particularly great offense. So I'm not kind of lording it over the Giants, but I just don't see massive talent there. I don't. And I think that they need to rectify that. I think given he massively overperformed last year. But I will say I agree with you in that they look underprepared. They look lost at times. They looked absolutely lost against the Cowboys. They looked absolutely lost for 3 quarters against the Cardinals. And they look lost against the Seahawks. And that would be a concern. Dable should be given time to sort it out. But I wonder, what do they do there?
They have scored fewer points on offense than the Bears. That tells you all you need to know about how the Giants' offense has performed so far this season. Yeah, I don't think anyone's seriously suggesting that Daboll will get the dreaded Ruth Hullet before the end of the season. But it's not impossible if things spiral beyond where they are now. Another coach you don't really expect to be on the hot seat, but who has questions to answer, to be fair, and particularly for sticking loyally by Matt Canada, is Mike Tomlin. Nobody was necessarily expecting the Steelers to go crazy this season or to be contenders, but you expect a level of competitiveness that hasn't necessarily been there.
Yeah, it's been like there were so many expectations coming into the season, and for the first time, I'm seeing Steelers fans really, now there've been some, but a very small minority who've kind of pointed out that while they've had winning seasons, they've maybe underperformed. But I think everyone's going to have ups and downs, and you have winning seasons. Not everyone goes to the playoffs. Not everyone wins the Super Bowl every year, but this year has felt different. It really has, and again, it is how much they have struggled on offense, and the fact that he brought Matt Canada back. Like I think if there had been a change at offensive coordinator, and even if right now they were struggling, people would be much more willing to. I think the other thing that hurt him is that he said there would be changes after the loss on Sunday. He said there would be changes, and then he comes out today and he's like, "Oh no, I just meant to changes in our training gear." Like, again, that's kind of, what is that supposed to mean? So that's now look, the Steelers are very often best when their backs are against the wall, and they are going to face up against the Ravens. And the other thing he did today is he talked about Zay Flowers for more than a minute, kind of eulogizing him and giving him praise. It'll be a really tough divisional battle, but you would have to say
they fronted up against the Browns in their other divisional battle. We shouldn't forget and knock them off in surprising fashion.
And I think they will front up, but the concern is that it doesn't seem like any lessons were learned from last year and any of the struggles. And it looks like Kenny Pickett and that offense have regressed, if anything, and regression is a real concern.
Colm, let's close it out on a positive note before we wrap for the evening. A good weekend had in London, I take it. You got a good game, you got good weather. And as you said, the Jags kind of near home experience seems to be growing year by year, which certainly will warm the hearts of us on this side of the Irish Sea as we look forward expectantly to perhaps a first NFL game within the foreseeable future. And it's closer than it has been in a long time. You had the London experience again over the weekend. How was it?
Yeah, I as I said earlier, I think the big takeaway for me was the fact that the Jags, it felt much more like a home game, and I think that's what it needed. it will be interesting this week to see how the full week in London has impacted on the Jags. But last year, when the Broncos took to the field, there were a smattering of boos. But if you've been to a game stateside, everyone knows the atmosphere when the road team takes the field. They are generally loudly greeted with boos. That was the case for the Falcons. The Jags fans made themselves heard, and I mean, I suppose this is what the NFL will want, right? Because London has had the games for so long. There are new cities coming on board. Peter O'Reilly was out on podcast last week talking about it. Henry Hodgson has talked about it. We know Madrid is going to happen. They've talked about they've had guys on the ground. They've had guys on the ground in Rio, or teams on the ground. I should say. I think that's only going to continue to grow. It will be interesting to see how long Wembley continues to host games. Like the experience at Wembley is very different to the experience at Spurs. The fact that Spurs is specifically built with the NFL in mind does make a big difference. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not quite like when you were trying to watch soccer at Croke Park, and if you were sitting down near pitch side, you had no idea if there was a cross coming in from the other side until it actually arrived at the far post. But it is not the same as being at an NFL ground. But the experience talking to people there, talking to people who went over, the weather was fantastic, which absolutely made it as well. And the walk up Wembley Way is class.
Yeah. As you say, it's Bills, Jags this weekend in the London game, Titans, Ravens the following weekend. We'll have a presence at both of those games. I'm really looking forward to getting over to Tottenham myself to see it for the first time for Titans, Ravens the weekend after next. But we'll be previewing Bills, Jags for this weekend when we do our Thursday preview show. There's also, of course, the Thursday night football preview podcast. It's Commanders, Bears. Brilliant piece of scheduling. Yay, can't wait for that, staying up till 1:20 a.m. on Friday morning for that one. Although we do owe the Commanders one. It's the list of the teams that the Bears owe at this stage is getting ridiculously long, unfortunately, after that 14 game losing streak. But we will be back on Thursday. We've lots more content for you. Thanks very much for joining us this evening on the Irish NFL Show.